As I mentioned to you this morning, the outline on the announcements wasn't this morning's sermon, it's tonight's. But it is that we're going to continue to think about involvement. And are you involved in the Lord's work at Eastern Meadows? You know, if we were to say, what do we mean by involvement? Well, the dictionary has its definitions: to engage as a participant, or the act or fact of participating. That's the involvement. But it's not just any involvement we're concerned about. We are concerned about the involvement in the Lord's work. So we're going to apply these ideas to God's commands. You know, there is a failure to be involved, and frankly, it's not good. Now, I grew up hearing the sin of commission and sin of omission. Not all of you may have heard those terms. The sin of commission is where you commit a wrong. So, commission. But the sin of omission was where you had failed to do something you know to do. You've omitted what you know to do. Sin of omission. Well, in James 4:17 you read, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is a sin. That is the verse teaching the sin of omission. Have you ever gotten in trouble for what you didn't do? I have an idea that everybody here, when they were a kiddo, got in trouble for something they didn't do. Maybe it was take out the garbage. Maybe it's some other kind of chore. Didn't do it, got in trouble. You remember the one-talent man? You read about the story of the talents there in Matthew 25. And there was the 5-talent man, the 2-talent man, the 1-talent man. The 5-talent man, he used those talents, he increased them, he had 5 more. So when the master came back, here he had those 10. The 2-talent man, he used them, he increased it by 2. And so when the master came back, he had 4. Now that 1-talent man, he didn't use them. Now he took the one, he dug a hole, he hid it in the earth. He wanted to be sure he wouldn't lose it. But he didn't use it. You know, that he omitted, he failed to do what he should do. And I want to tell you something. When you get to these verses, Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 26, 28, and then as well verse 30, you know, it's clear he suffered as a result of the sin of omission. You read, see in verse 26, the master answered to him, "You wicked and slothful servant." Then in verse 28, so take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. So he lost even the one he had. And then you get to verse 30, and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We don't want to fail to do. We don't want to fail to be involved. The rich man. You remember the story of the rich man in Luke 16? Well, here's some of the verses beginning in verse 19. It says, there was a certain man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. Now the way he's described, rich, clothed in purple, fared sumptuously, you could just say this: he had the means. And later as we see, the question has to do with, I want something to eat. He fared sumptuously, had plenty, more than enough. Verse 20. There's a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores. Now it seems clearly here that it was not a one-time thing. This rich man likely knew of this poor man's problems that led to him having to be laid there, and how he's troubled physically, full of sores. So we can say this: the need was apparent. And the reason I point that out, I'll admit, sometimes needs are not always apparent. Sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes our failure to know, though, is not being involved in people's lives. But then sometimes as well, you might think, well, but upon investigation you find out the need is not real. This is a real need, and he knows it. Verse 21, Lazarus, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died, was carried in by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. Okay? Here we've got this poor man. And here we've got the rich man. The poor man, he's in Abraham's bosom. I'd suggest to you it wasn't because he was poor. Rather, it was because he was righteous. But the rich man, and in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, seeing Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. We see here the danger of failing to involve ourselves, failing to do what we know is right. But I want you to notice something. This rich man, he was not condemned for what he did. He had not, as far as we know, he had not committed adultery. As far as we know, he had not murdered. As far as we know, he had not stolen. As far as we know, no, he was not condemned for what he did. He was condemned for what he did not do. He failed to involve himself in what was right. You know, we have this idea of you did it not in Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. If you've got a translation like mine, it's in paragraph form, and above verse 31 it says the final judgment. And it is a judgment scene described of the goats, the nations, the goats on the left side, the sheep on the right. And then we find that as you see what was said to them, for I was hungered, you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. Naked, you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me. Then shall the righteous man answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungered and fed thee, or thirsty, or a stranger, or sick, or a prison, and came to you? And the king shall answer and say to them, as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, you've done it to me. And you see, this was the doing. This was the involvement. This was the good part. They were blessed because they had involved themselves in these benevolent activities. Then you get on down further. Then shall he say to them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Then he goes on to say, These shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. These were the ones who had failed to do these benevolent acts. You see, he said, You gave me no drink. You took me not in. You clothed me not. You visited me not. In other words, failed to involve themselves in what was right and what was good in these benevolent activities. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan. Here you had this man that was beaten, robbed, basically left for dead. Priest and Levite, they come along. They're not interested in helping. And oh, by the way, if you think who would be the ones to involve themselves, we tend to think, okay, the priest and the Levite. No, not interested. For whatever reasons they had, they didn't stop. They didn't take the time. They didn't help this man. But then the Samaritan. In fact, if we had taken the three, not knowing the story at all, and we were just proposed, here is a man beaten, robbed, left for dead, and along come a priest, a Levite, and Samaritan. Which one's going to help him? Have an idea the survey was taken. Most would say, maybe the priest or the Levite, not the Samaritan. But it was the Samaritan who helped him. Helped him? Why, he took of his own oil and wine. He took his time. He was inconvenienced. Then even took him to an inn. Paid for it. Left more. And even the promise of more if it was necessary. He was the one who had really involved himself. the Good Samaritan. You know, we could say that with regards to our church work or our Christianity, most people tend to understand a basic level of involvement. And I want to tell you, you know what people think of? And you know this. They think of, well, I come to church on Sunday. Worship. And so they think in terms of singing. And oh, by the way, I hope everybody is singing. It's not that we're to listen to it. It's not just that we're to appreciate the fact that others do. We are to sing, each of us. Can't sing so good, so what? Sing. Don't know the song, so what? Try. Do your best. Praying, giving, eating the Lord's Supper, studying God's Word. See, I'm calling this a basic level of involvement. And I hate to say this, but there's some people who never get beyond the basic. In almost every congregation, without exception, you find that it has multiple services. I recognize maybe there's some places in the world that multiple services are not even a practicality because people can't easily get back for a service in the evening. You know, we're blessed with a reasonable proximity and we've got vehicles and good roads. It's not true of everybody around the world. But as we would have these multiple services, and most people in the United States do, and you look at statistically, okay, the Sunday morning crowd, and then the Sunday evening crowd, and maybe even a Wednesday night crowd. You know where we're going to see the largest attendance? Always. Sunday morning worship. And there will be a significant number of people who come for that Sunday morning worship. Some will never miss. I appreciate the fact that they don't. But the sad fact, they may never come back again. In other words, they get that basic level of involvement. Our elders have given us a theme and challenge of 4 hours eternal assurance. And while they'd readily acknowledge somebody could come to Bible class and Sunday morning worship, Sunday evening worship, and Wednesday evening Bible class, and still not even be a Christian or still not live a faithful life. But I think we all see how being at these Bible classes, being in these assemblies, help us be the faithful Christian so that we can have eternal assurance. These 4 hours, Sunday morning Bible study, Sunday morning worship, Sunday evening worship, Sunday evening Bible study. That's the challenge. And I hope that we will make up our minds. You know, sometimes people say, that was for Sunday morning, not Sunday night. Well, you know, to emphasize being here Sunday night to the Sunday night, not the Sunday morning, may be kind of like, wrong service. But I hope that all of us would think in terms of stepping it up. Do more. Yes, more than Sunday morning. Be it Sunday evening worship. Be it the Bible classes. But also, as we have the Sunday night service after Sunday night worship, that you take a card and write that note or make that phone call or maybe even step it up further and make the visit. That as we are divided into teams and have these meals twice a month, that would want to be involved in the team fellowship meals. You know, there's going to be some work days planned this year. And that you think in terms of, okay, I'm going to be there for that work day. And I know, too, if I'm there for that work day and I encourage others to be there and we have a good number, we get it done and get it finished. Stepping it up. There's lots of ladies' activities. In fact, I have never known of a congregation that has more ladies involved working in various ways than Eastern Meadows does. Great work has been done, simply called ladybugs. You know, I have wondered if you were to name the men, what would you name them? And I'm scared to think what it might be. But I appreciate the example of ladies have set for the men. Will you involve yourself? Have men's meetings. And there are various ways to be involved in evangelism. By the way, I applaud our elders in saying, we want you here at 3:30 today because we want you to consider how you will and how you can be involved. But I would remind you of something. There's so much of the Lord's work nobody has to ask you to do. So much of the Lord's work, it may be that others don't even know you do. This last one, evangelize, that's you. Maybe taking, we have the invite them cards in the back. Little business-like cards. Just have the worship assemblies of the church here and it says, come worship with me. Keep some of those with you. Have a little conversation with somebody. They may be a stranger. Give them a card. You never know when the invitation will result in their attendance. That might even result in a Bible study. In fact, just very recently, that's been the case. Somebody made an invitation. They didn't have to sign up to make an invitation. They didn't have to make a check mark saying, I'll do that. See, much involvement. You don't have to be asked to do that evangelism. I hope that would be a part of our lives. Stepping it up. Will you involve yourself? You see, you're needed. Every member of the body is needed. Say this, don't be aloof. There's some folks that just stand separate. Now, somebody might say, well, that's their personality. Well, okay. But every member is needed. Look at this. 1 Corinthians 12, one of my favorite sections of Scripture, because it describes how much we need each other. Look at verse 15. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body. Would that would not make it any less a part of the body. The ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body. That would not make it any less part of the body. This is standing aloof. This person, I can't do that, so I'm not a part of the body. It's not that way. He says if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell? The whole idea is every member is needed. And every member has something to contribute. So that's this guy kind of, I'm just aloof. But then you got kind of the other side of the coin. You see, we need to involve others, and others are needed. Look at 1 Corinthians 12, beginning of verse 21. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Nor again to the hand of the feet, I have no need of you. Now, this isn't one member standing aloof. That's the other members kind of pushing him away. And how dare that happen? In fact, it says, on the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. If there's somebody you want to think, I don't know what they could do, or I'm not sure where they'll fit in, you remember that. They're indispensable. You need them. Every member is needed. I think a good motto is every member working and a work for every member. And I think that's the implication of 1 Corinthians 12. Every member working and a work for every member. Now, why do we not get involved? Well, sometimes it's fear. You know, Moses, fearful, he began to make excuses. Sometimes people say, well, I'm too busy. And, you know, I'll just say this. Sometimes people do stay very busy. Maybe it's selfishness. In other words, I want to reserve my time for me. My time, my money. Well, sadly, I think it's more so, sometimes indifference. People just so busy. They don't see the world's needs, don't care. Maybe it's personalities now. I like to think there were never any personality conflicts in the Lord's church. I'd like to think that. It's not true. Sometimes that can hinder involvement. Sometimes a lack of understanding about the need. Well, that's kind of what today partly was about, to say, here are needs. Please be aware. And I'll just say this. As time progresses, months go by and years, I hope we are refining this. And that's the intention. And there may be more and more and more things added to those lists for ladies, for men, so that we can be involved in the Lord's work. And sometimes, why do people not get involved? Sometimes they're just not being asked. You'd like to think everybody's going to be right there volunteering. Not everybody will. And some people are just literally waiting to be asked. Well, sometimes we need to do the asking. Let me say, the Good Samaritan, remember that guy? Nobody asked him. And there he was, ready to assist that man. Now, there are some literal and real hindrances. And I'm just going to say this. I'm going to mention these quickly just to say, yes, these can hinder. And it's just life. That's how we deal with things. One is time. As I stand here, I see the clock back there ticking. Are you able to manufacture more than 24 hours a day? Can some of you somehow click off 8 or 9 days in a week on your calendar? Or are you able to somehow find the 13th month? Doesn't happen. Not possible. We are confined with the amount of time in a day. And when we consider the responsibilities that we have that are legitimate and necessary, and I'll say this, as a Christian, right to participate and do, time does limit us. That's an understanding that will hinder us. Another hindrance, I say this, we would say this, good hindrance, but children and family. It's the case that you got a wife or husband, you better give your wife and husband time. You have children, woe be to you as mom and dad if you don't spend the time to rear them and train them in the way of the Lord. And it takes time. So not 24 hours a day is yours to choose. Some of that's got to be those necessary things like work. Children and family, dare not neglect them. Health. I've had people tell me as they aged, as health problems entered their life, they says, I just can't do what I used to do. I'm frustrated. I want to be more involved. Yes. Here are some legitimate ways we can be hindered. But even if there are some things that limit our involvement, we need to be involved. Maybe we can't be to the extent if we had 25 hours in a day or 8 days in a week or 13 months in a year. Or if we were able to be independent, not have a job. Or for that person that doesn't have family obligations. Or the person with good health. We need to be involved. Reasons to involve yourself? There's many. In fact, that's really kind of the scope of the lesson this morning. The reason to be involved. And it just comes down to, I'm saved to serve. And I see that first church, and I see that early glimpse there in Acts 2, and I see involvement. I see the church at Corinth. I see involvement because they had first given their own selves to the Lord and to us, to the disciples. by the will of God. I see the involvement of particular individuals like Paul. Look at his life. And that prime example, Jesus Christ. I want to give you one last reason to be involved. Somebody might say, 12 tribes of Israel, why is that a reason? Well, these 12 tribes, they had exited Egypt. Now the promised land was become theirs. Unfortunately, after that time spent at Sinai and finally making to the promised land, the spies sent in and 10 come back with a discouraging report. They didn't go into the land. They had those years of wandering. But then finally time came again to go in and take the land. But Reuben and Gad, you see, they were content to settle on the east of Jordan. We like this. We're content to just stay here. You can have the rest. Well, to have stayed on the east side of Jordan, there would no conquest have been necessary. But look at Numbers 32, verse 5. If we found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across Jordan. That's what we just said. But here's Moses' response. Shall your brother go to war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? He's saying, you go, you participate, you involve yourself, or you discourage. You know, this is real. A lack of involvement discourages others. If one person feels like, I called for help, nobody showed up. I'm doing ABC, and everybody knows ABC needs to be done, but nobody's helping with ABC. It's discouraging. And there's a reason here to be involved. So we don't discourage others. That is literally, sometimes we do things for others' sake. You see, God is not happy with those who discourage the hearts of God's people from doing God's will. See further in Numbers 32, beginning of verse 8, some of these words and these verses. Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, look, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them. And the Lord's anger was kindled on that day. And behold, I have risen in your father's place, a brood of anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following me, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. Don't discourage God's people. Involvement, an absolute necessity if we will be pleasing God. Involved in the Lord's work. And as we're members here at Eastern Meadows, that's involved in the Lord's work here at Eastern Meadows. As we close, I pray that you will have the desire and determination to be more involved, to see the ways you can be involved. If you see things that, well, maybe it wasn't on a list, but you see and know it needs to be done, some things you can just go do it. Some things you might say, hey elder, hey deacon, what about this? Let's be involved in the Lord's work. If we could assist you in your obedience tonight, if it's a matter of you have not yet become a Christian, that you have not with faith turned from your sin, repentance. If you would do that, we can now give you opportunity to confess that faith and assist you in baptism for the remission of sins. If there's need for prayer, we'd be glad to take the time and pray. If you need to come, please come.